Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. We're here with the Food Service Packaging Institute, and we're going to be hearing about how you can work towards your community's diversion goals with help from the Food Service Packaging Institute using some of the resources we've developed. As folks log on here, we'll get started and talk about some of the logistics for the call. Today, we have Lynn Dyer as your primary presenter. I am Risa Domino. I'll be your moderator today. I'm a senior consultant with Resource Recycling Systems, and I've been in the waste and recycling industry for about 30 years from a bunch of different perspectives as local government, state government, NGO, trade association, and private industry. Happy to be here today with Lynn Dyer. Lynn will be making the presentation today. She is the president of the Food Service Packaging Institute, which is the trade association for the North American food service packaging industry. That trade association includes packaging converters and their raw material and machinery suppliers, as well as food service operators, distributors, and group purchasing organizations. In her role as president of FPI, Lynn advocates for the interests of the food service packaging industry and champions its efforts to expand recycling and composting of food service packaging. We at RRS are very pleased to be able to work with FPI in advancing these efforts. Before joining FPI in 1998, Lynn worked with the European Food Service and Packaging Association, now called Pack2Go Europe, in Brussels, Belgium, and she holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Richmond. A couple of technical details as we get started here. You should see a control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, which allows you to change your audio and your phone settings. If you have questions during the presentation or as the presentation is wrapping up towards the end, please use the Q&A. You'll see the little picture of the button there. Use that feature to funnel your questions, and I will be preparing those for Lynn at the end of her presentation. And also, we'll be making a recording of this session available on the recyclefsp.org website. Now I'll hand it over to Lynn.
Thank you very much, Risa. I appreciate the introduction. And thanks to all of you who are joining us today. I see we're close to about 60 participants, so that's very encouraging to me to hear that there are that many communities and other stakeholders out there that are interested in recycling and composting more food service packaging. So I'm going to start off with just giving you a bit of an overview about FPI and some of the work that we've been doing. So for those of you who are not familiar with FPI, we are the Food Service Packaging Institute. Risa already gave you a bit of an explanation about who we are. We've actually been around for quite some time, established in 1933. And she already covered, kind of who our members include, but, the most important thing to note is that our membership really does cover the entire value chain for the food service packaging industry. And because we also represent such a large portion of the industry, when we speak, we are representing the entire industry, which is great. So really from a very high level, if you look at the recovery goals that we established, from our standpoint, we're really looking to increase the recovery of food service packaging, primarily through recycling and composting. And one of the things, again, from a very, very high level is when we started this project, we really wanted to make sure we were using a systems-based approach to make sure that there was a lot of collaboration throughout both our supply chain and beyond. So I mentioned FPI represents the supply chain from raw material suppliers all the way through the brand owners or the operators, but really from our standpoint, we need to get to know the other stakeholders in the value chain if we wanted to get our products recycled or composted. So to that end, actually back in 2011, a number of our members came to us and said that they were interested in really focusing some efforts on recycling and composting, particularly of paper food service packaging products. So in 2011, FPI formed the Paper Recovery Alliance. I will try not to use acronyms, but I think you all know it's acronym city these days, so I will try to be careful about that. A year later, our plastics members came to us and said that they wanted to do something specifically on recycling of food service packaging, and so the plastics recovery group was formed. You know, those two groups operated separately for about a year, and then we realized, you know what, that's pretty silly. The only one who was really benefiting was our consultants, because we had two different consultants for the same project, and ultimately you might have a paper cup with a plastic lid, or, you know, some sort of combination. So we as converters think about paper and plastic and aluminum and other materials, but once it hits the operator or the MRF floor or, you know, a composter, it might be a combination. So the PRA and the PRG combined, and they work together from now since 2013. A couple years later, our members that actually manufacture foam food service packaging, foam polystyrene, recognized that they had some very unique challenges and some different tactics that they wanted to use. And so a third group was actually formed called the Foam Recycling Coalition, and I'll speak a little bit about that organization today. And then our most recent group is our Paper Cup Alliance, and those are the folks that make both the paper cups as well as their raw material suppliers. Really wanted to accelerate the work specifically on recycling of poly-coated paper cups, particularly in the United States. So now we actually have 4 separate groups within FPI, but they certainly do work collaboratively, and there's certainly a lot of overlap as we go along. So I'm going to start off with the PRA-PRG and give you a little bit of foundational work and just help to explain some of the approaches that we've used along the way. So I think one of the things from our standpoint is we had a lot of questions, and people came to us with a lot of questions when we first started the project that we were working on. You know, even things like we didn't even understand exactly how many tons of materials are out there to be recycled or composted. You know, how do you actually collect that information? Where do you collect that information? You know, it's interesting because I think because so many of us are on the go and we're, you know, grabbing a cup of coffee to go or grabbing dinner on the go, you just naturally assume there must be a lot of food service packaging out there to be recycled or composted. And let's say you say yes to that, you might think that you're going to get flooded with those items. The reality is it's a very, very small amount, and we would point to EPA has data that shows that the amount of materials that are going to landfills today, roughly or less than 2% of that material is actually food service packaging. So very, very small in terms of the municipal solid waste stream. The other thing that was interesting was from a collection standpoint, you know, when we think food service packaging, we're thinking about, you know, our favorite fast food restaurant or coffee shop, but the reality is most of that packaging leaves the store because so many products are taken through drive-through or carry-out, delivery now, and roughly at this point, 70% of that material actually leaves the store. So what we've been really focused on is that residential collection, because that's where the biggest portion of used food service packaging ultimately ends up, because people get those items to go or they leave it in their car and then ultimately want to go to recycle it in their home. But then we got deeper and deeper and looked at things like, okay, well, what's really going on within the MRF landscape? Do the MRFs even accept these products? You know, we really spent some time trying to understand what the barriers were and whether they were real or perceived. You know, so for example, one of the myths that we continue to hear 10 years later is really that, you know, bringing on food service packaging into a recycling program is really going to bring a lot of food scraps with it. Now, that might be helpful if you're running a composting program, but that's not necessarily something you want from a recycling standpoint. So we had done studies that actually looked at, you know, will you actually see more food scraps or not? And the answer was no to that. We've done studies like where are the end markets? That's really critical to what we're doing. And we're going to be talking about a few more of these things that are highlighted in here. But the bottom line for you to understand is we've been very methodical about the work that we've been doing and very thorough. So if we look from a very high level, at least on the recycling side, you know, the overall goal is we want to develop and promote those economically viable and sustainable recovery solutions for food service packaging. You know, honestly, we are not looking for one-off programs. We need to have something that's going to be scalable. And one of the things that, because I mentioned residential is such a key part, we wanted to try to figure out how could we expand the acceptance of food service packaging in curbside recycling programs and actually know that it's truly going to get recovered and not just placed into the bin. And so we want to make sure that we're working with communities where we've done the research and we understand that there are reliable markets for those products to ultimately go to. So food service packaging to us encapsulates a lot of different types of products, but for the purposes of the work that we've really been focusing on, at least on the recycling side, it's really more four things. Cups, so beverage cups, including the sleeves that you might find around hot cups, takeout containers, boxes, so that can be like pizza boxes, for example, and paper carry-out bags. Those are really the big four items that we're focused primarily on in the work that we're doing. And the reason for that is, again, going back to some of the initial activities that we did, we really stopped to take a look at, okay, we literally mapped out every type of food service packaging product out there, and we had these crazy spaghetti charts that really helped to identify, you know, can it be collected? Is it going to flow through a MRF? Are there end markets for it? And so, you know, once we did all of that, we realized that cups, containers, boxes, and bags make up a large portion of all food service packaging, but also had a much higher likelihood of actually getting recycled. So you'll see a map like this several times during the presentation, but the idea is we really wanted to hit home that we have a very much market-driven approach. Nothing happens unless there is an end market for the product. And so we've really spent a lot of time trying to understand and expand those potential end markets. And the other thing, too, is that we haven't had a national program because, as we all know, recycling is not necessarily a national situation. It's very different community to community. So our targets have been very much focused around those locations where we know we have those strong end markets to take the material. So that's a very high-level overview of kind of the work that we've been doing, but I know you're here because you want some good information and some free resources for many of you. So we wanted to take a few minutes to really share those with you. So the big program that we run is what we call our Community Partnership Program. And so what we do is, as I mentioned, we try to find communities that are located close to end markets for those food service packaging products and work with those communities, with the MRFs, to add a whole suite of food service packaging to their recycling programs. And I'll talk a little bit more about those community partnership programs. So this just gives you a bit of a visual in terms of what goes into us setting up a community partnership program and all the different elements of that. So as I mentioned, that we've been very methodical, very thorough, and we conduct an awful lot of due diligence before we get to the point where we can say, hey, we have a community partner. So there's a lot of engagement with the MRF operations, you know, what kind of, how are you sorting, what kind of bales are you selling, what are the end markets, what about the haulers, you know, who's bringing the material into your facility or for your MRF. From a community standpoint, you know, what's that relationship like with the MRF? You know, is there interest at that community level to expand their current recycling program? But then we also want to make sure that everybody on board understands exactly what we're trying to do and everybody's really buying into the program that we're trying to set up. So once we really check off the box for all those different stakeholders and everyone is indeed in alignment, then we move into the next process. And that is a contracting stage to really make sure that we are all on the same page and we understand exactly what the goals are for each of the stakeholders involved. And frankly, you know, there's going to be some financial investment from FPI, so we want to make sure that everybody is in agreement and we're ready to move forward. Then we look at that operational aspect. You know, are there any changes that have to take place? What types of, you know, just from the MRF standpoint or even from the community standpoint, what needs to happen? And really from the community standpoint, that's really where you get into the communications plan. And that's been a real fun and exciting part of this whole project, and a great way to work with the community to try to figure out what's the best way to get the message to the residents that they should be recycling their food service packaging. And we work with the community to understand exactly how they want to do that, whether it's billboards or videos or flyers or stickers or whatever it happens to be. Ultimately, when we've done all of that, then we actually have a kickoff plan. And so we generally have some sort of public kickoff launch program with the local officials, as well as any other senior folks that are going to be involved. And then, you know, you can't manage what you don't measure, and so it's really been pretty critical to us to make sure we have some data behind all of this. So we will do before and after audits to really understand what's happening before we start the program, and then also from afterwards, you know, can we quantify exactly how much food service packaging is coming in? Are we helping to increase the amount of recyclables? You know, are we helping to reduce residue? What's the situation? So we want to make sure we're capturing that information. So in 2017, that's when we first launched our community partnership program, and we were very thrilled to actually work with 3 different communities in 2017, Chattanooga, Washington, D.C., and Louisville, Kentucky. And in all cases, they were slightly different, but there were very common themes that you'll see across all these different programs. And our latest community partnership was actually just launched last Monday in Kent County, Michigan. So we're thrilled to that Kent County is our latest community partner. So one of the things that we're also trying to do, and we have said we want to be very as transparent as possible in the work that we're doing. And so one of the things that we're trying to do, I mentioned, is data collection is really important. I'm not going to go through every single statistic that's on this page, but for the first 3 community partners, it's important to note that they're seeing tremendous successes. And I would say 2 different things. Number one, it's been fascinating and really encouraging to see that contamination levels have actually dropped in all 3 of those cities. And I think one of the reasons that we see that is because when you add new items to any program, that gives you the opportunity to re-educate your residents on how and why and what to recycle. And so I think one of the things, the other exciting thing that we've seen is from an engagement standpoint, you've really seen tremendous increases for the communities in terms of website traffic or requests for carts from their residents, engagement on social media. I mean, just look at something like Washington, D.C. One of the things that we helped with Washington, D.C. was actually create a video about recycling your food service packaging, and they had hundreds of thousands of views of that particular video. And it has been such a success that actually that video is available to be personalized and used by any community partner that we work with. So I would say it's been nothing but really good data points that have been coming out. And I will be honest with you, we're not just showing you the good data points because these are the only data points that we have. So there's really just very good information coming out of these community partners to date. Having said that, we do have additional community partners that we've been working with, but we just don't have the data. And as soon as we do, we will certainly be sharing those publicly with everyone. So just again, from a high level, what FPI can provide if you opt to become a community partner is an awful lot of information and research, whether it's technical assistance. We'll send one of our teammates out to meet with the MRF and the community to really understand their needs, really helping to support those end market dialogues, that communications planning, and really any assistance that might be needed for educational materials. We've worked with some communities where they've said, you know what, just can you do everything for us and you just tell us what to do, and we're fine with doing that. We've also worked with other communities saying, hey, we've got this, but we could really use your help here and there. So it really just has been dependent on the community in terms of the support that they need. So if you are looking for more information and to apply to be a community partner, we have a website address here, recycleffp.org/community. So one of the things is we realize that not everyone is going to be a community partner, a full-blown community partner. They just might be looking for some different information. And so one of the things that we did was we took a lot of the research that I showed in that foundational slide and put it into a website, recyclefsp.org. And if you go to that site, and here's just a screenshot for you, we've really tried to separate it into the different stakeholders that we think might be interested. And I'll be talking a little bit more about this, but if you're a food service operator, we have an entire section dedicated to you, so you might be interested in adding recycling or composting in your store. We have a toolkit to help you do that. If you're a community, a MRF, an end market, more on the composting side, we have resources for all those different stakeholders. So one of the things that's been very helpful and one of the most popular locations on that site is our end market information. I mentioned that end markets are critical to all the work that we're doing, and so one of the things that we have done is we've actually designed an interactive end market map, and obviously it's not interactive here on this webinar, but if you go on here, you're able to actually pull out, okay, I'm trying to find an end market that will accept PET thermoforms, or I'm looking for an end market that is going to take like mixed paper bales that would contain food service packaging. Whatever it happens to be, they're viewable by category, so this is a really great resource. And frankly, whether you're looking for food service packaging products or not, I think this is a helpful resource for anyone. So in some cases, what we've had to do is create specific resources for specific products. Excuse me. And one of the focuses of our groups that I mentioned, we had our Paper Cup Alliance, is that we want to expand the options to recycle your PE coated and PLA coated cups and takeout containers. And so we have some special resources really focused just on those items. And it's been interesting to see, because only a couple of years ago there were maybe a handful of mills that had said that they'd be willing to accept bales with poly-coated cups and containers, and today there are now 21 mills in North America that will take either mixed paper bales or a poly-coat bale that would include cartons as well as poly-coated items. And we have a one-pager specifically that's you can see screenshotted here on the right-hand side. But again, we keep that list up to date when there are new ones coming on the marketplace. And certainly we anticipate that number will go up. So I talked a lot about recycling resources, but there's a handful of composting resources available to anyone in that composting section. So just to give you a flavor of what you're going to be able to find, one of the things that we did a couple of years ago now was work with the Compost Manufacturing Alliance to really understand food service packaging as a feedstock in composting facilities. And so the entire report is available for you to download on our website. We have a number of case studies really looking at how composters across the U.S. and Canada have been able to successfully integrate food service packaging as a feedstock in their facilities. And then we also have things like flyers, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on. So I would also point out that the work that we've been doing and the resources that you find on recyclefsp.org is really geared towards the U.S. and Canada. But given attention that we've seen in California, and particularly based on different policy drivers in California, we actually developed an entire website specifically for the California marketplace. So it's very similar to our other website that I just talked about, focusing on operators and communities and MRFs and composting facilities and markets, but it's really geared only to the California marketplace. So for those of you who happen to be on the phone and watching this webinar and you're based in California, I would encourage you to take a look at recyclefspinca.org. So we've talked a bit about paper and plastic food service packaging, and that's really, when I say plastic, that's more the rigid side. But I do want to just share some resources if you're interested in recycling foam polystyrene as well. So the FPI's Foam Recycling Coalition, in that case, what they are doing is they're actually providing grants to MRFs or to communities, whoever it happens to be, that's interested in either adding foam polystyrene recycling or expanding their current program to include food service packaging. And typically that money, and what we have seen historically is that grant money typically tops out at about $50,000, and that money is used for equipment such as densifiers. And the advantage of using a densifier when you're recycling foam is if you think about foam polystyrene, it's 90+% air. There's a lot of air in that material, and so shipping it efficiently with all that air is not so efficient. So if you're able to densify that material, then that makes it a bit more economical to be able to do that. So what we've seen is we've put that grant program out starting in 2014, I want to say, and that's been very successful, and I'll share a bit of the information with you, but if you're a MRF operator or you're operating a curbside program, we've worked with a number of convenience sites or drop-off sites that were interested in adding foam polystyrene to their programs. So if you're interested in potentially applying for that grant, I would encourage you to go to recyclefoam.org/grants. Just to give you, I talked about data and how important data is to us, and so this just gives you a visual for the data that we're collecting on the foam recycling side. We're tracking how many different grant projects we've had in the marketplace since 2015 when we started. What's the value of that material that we're collecting, and then also access. Honestly, there are a lot of folks that are interested in being able to say something's recyclable from a standpoint of access to be able to recycle it, and we want to have more households across the country and Canada be able to actually have access to recycle that. And so what you're seeing is, as a result of the grant programs that we've offered, you see that access to foam recycling go up year after year. And then finally, we're also trying to understand exactly how many pounds of foam we're actually successfully recycling. And again, you start to see those numbers go up and up and up. And so our plan is to continue to have that information. Typically, when we sign a contract because of the grant or even with a community partnership, it's for a set period of time, and we ask you to share that information with us. And we've been really pleased because what we found is that some of the grants where even the grant cycle or the grant period has ended, they continue to share that data with us, and that's great because then we can continue to share great stories about foam polystyrene recycling. So this is perhaps one of the more exciting and fun part of the job, and that's really how do you educate the residents on recycling and composting of food service packaging, and we have lots of really good free resources for you, which I'll talk to you about. So one of the things that we did, I don't know, maybe 2016, 15, can't remember. But the bottom line was we actually did a survey of 1,000 households to really get a better understanding of what they thought about recycling, in this case, food service packaging. How do they do it? Where do they do it? What do they rely on? And we use that information to then relay that and build that into a lot of the materials that we have done since. So just on the, and I will tell you that all the results of this survey are available for free on our website, but just to give you a really great example of some of the things that we've been dealing with. So on the right-hand side of your screen, you see Q3. And so we showed a picture of, I don't know what you, fill in the blank, would call that item on the right-hand side. But for those of us in the industry, we might call it a clamshell container. But when you ask the residents, what do you call it? Well, very few of them actually call it number 6 plastic or clamshell. It's typically more a foam container or takeout. And I think that was one of the biggest learnings for us is, we can't speak in industry terms. If we're trying to educate and inform the residents, we need to use the language that really resonates with them. And that's why this survey had been very, very helpful in helping us to inform a lot of the work that has been ongoing ever since. So what we have done is we took a lot of the information that we've collected and we developed a resident education kit. And I'm going to go through each of the different sections, but this gives you a good idea. But this is a really great section of that recyclefsp.org website. So if you're looking for some really great free information, this is a place where you would be able to go. So just some of the highlights from that section. We actually developed a best practices guide on how you would actually talk about recycling food service packaging, and we've also recently developed one that's how you talk about incorporating food service packaging in your composting program as well. And it really provides in terms best practices in terms of graphics, in terms of what to call things, and any kind of special instructions you might want to be able to give to people. And I think the interesting thing about that is not only did we use the survey that we conducted, but we also took a lot of other resources. So we looked at various communities across the country to understand what terms that they were using and graphics that they were using, as well as things like other associations and organizations that had identified how they were doing it. So we really took the best of the best and encapsulated it into one document, really focused specifically on food service packaging. And again, that's available for both recycling and for composting. So we know that based on our conversations with a lot of communities, can often be starved for money, resources, help, and one of the things we wanted to do was to provide as many free resources as possible. And so one of the things that we've done is actually developed a flyer both for recycling and for composting that includes food service packaging, but also other items as well. And again, this was based on the survey, so if you actually pull up the survey results, one of the questions we asked was, we showed a number of different residential flyers and said, which is the easiest one to read? And we came to learn, how best to present that information. So frankly, a lot of white space, don't throw too much in there, really kind of pull it out in broad categories, and then make sure you're including special instructions like clean and empty. And I think that's one of the most important things is, especially when you're talking about paper items, for example. I think we often see the words food soiled paper, but residents may not understand what food soiled means, but really clean and empty seem to resonate more than any other terms that we found. And that's why we really encourage you to make sure you're prompting them to say, recycle only your clean and empty items. And it's not just about food service packaging. We've made sure to include good tips like make sure you're not bagging your recyclables, or take your plastic bags back to store drop-off, whatever it happens to be. So this is just an example, but again, both of these are customizable that you could potentially use within your own community. Another thing that we offer are free images. So you might have a flyer that you work with, but you just need to find some new images. We have both of those images for recycling programs and for composting programs, and we've tried to find images that are brand neutral and really help to educate the residents on what you're really looking for. So those are available free for you to download. And then there's a lot of work that we've been doing within FPI, but there's also other activities outside of our recycling and composting work that are really helping to advance recovery throughout the system. And here are just a couple of different examples of the work that we've been doing. For example, I hope everybody on the phone understands and knows APR, the Association of Plastic Recyclers, Demand Champions program to really help to close that loop and make sure there's that demand for recycled plastics. And one of the things that we worked with them on was to expand that program to include polystyrene. And then frankly, we've actually worked with our members to encourage them to participate in that program, because we understand without that demand for the recovered material, whether it's plastic or paper, that really is critical. So we need to make sure we're doing that. End market development, we keep hammering it home, but end market development is critical, and we're fortunate enough that at least within the FPI membership, we have several companies that are vertically integrated, and or they might, have other businesses like they might run MRFs, and so they're able to really help us and making sure that we're able to increase that recovery of both paper and plastic. On the composting side, we know that one of the greatest challenges for us right now on the composting side is really making sure that there is an infrastructure there to collect that, those food scraps and packaging. And so we've been working very diligently with a number of different stakeholders, from composters to the packaging manufacturers to the haulers to venues, to really make sure that there are additional locations to be able to process that material. A couple other examples here in terms of education and design. Right now we're actually working with some other organizations on design for recycling, design for composting of food service packaging. And so it's either creating new guides or working with existing guides like APR's Design for a Recycling Guide to really make sure that we're helping to educate, in our case, our food service packaging industry to say, if you want to put a product into the marketplace, make sure you're designing it specifically for the recycling and or composting streams in particular. And then finally, another thing that we just did and was just announced in the last month or so was we worked with our friends over at APR to really highlight, that there is demand for particularly polypropylene, and that this information sheet that we created is really geared towards the MRFs, so they really understand, hey, there is great demand for that polypropylene. Let's make sure we're capturing that. So where do you go from here? So I have done a lot of talking. I very rarely breathe, and I will just tell you, if you have questions, if you're looking for more information, I wanted to get a couple of different links on there for you. So if you're specifically interested in recycling or composting, paper and, let's say, rigid food service packaging, recyclefsp.org is a great website for you. That's a great go-to. If you're particularly interested in the community partnerships, then there is that section for communities, but if you want to just click on the link when you get the slides, then you'll see those here as well. If you're particularly interested in recycling foam food service packaging, so cups, takeout containers, etc., recyclefoam.org is your go-to site. And then again, if you're interested in applying for the grants that the FRC offers, there's the link specifically for that. So with that, that's all I have for you today. So I will turn it back over to Risa to start peppering me with all your questions.
Thank you so much, Lynn. That was really informative and helpful. We have a couple of questions in the queue, and I'll invite other folks to submit questions as we go through these answers here. Lynn, the first question we have is, I think it's about the community partnerships. The question is, who is signing these contracts? Is it communities, haulers, or MRFs?
It's typically either the community or the MRF. We have not signed any specifically with the hauler. So it really has just, it's been dependent on the community itself. If the community owns the MRF, then it might just be one. In some cases, it may be a situation where we have to sign two different ones. One of the community partners we did a couple of years ago or a year ago now, it was specifically with the MRF, and so the contract was with them. So it really is just dependent on the organization. And I would also say that, on the composting side, we're looking at doing some partnerships specifically with venues, not necessarily with communities, and so that contract would be with that specific venue, not the community.
And when you say venue, you mean like a stadium or something like that?
Yes, okay. That's correct. Because one of the things is, it's not just about access to be able to recycle and compost, it's true recovery. So in some cases, what we're doing is we want to be able to work with, on the composting side, we want to work with venues or locations where they may be purchasing compostable food service packaging, but it's all going to landfill right now. And obviously we want to be able to close that loop, and we want to be able to have that composted. So we'll work with them and their local composter to make that happen.
Great. So the next question is, do you promote single-use packaging over reusable items?
Right now, yes, we do. So the Food Service Packaging Institute represents the single-use food service packaging industry, and so yes, that is what we are promoting right now. Now, we also recognize that there is a growing interest in reusable items, but that's not the focus of the work that we're doing right now.
Okay. The next question we have is, how does a MRF distinguish a paper cup from a plastic cup? And I can offer some on that, Lynn, if you'd like, from our
Sure, go ahead.
perspective. It depends on the type of facility and what kind of sorting systems they have. The facilities that handle most of the material collected and processed in North America typically rely on optical sortation. And so, and a combination, I should say, that if it's a single stream facility, it's a combination of 2D, 3D separation on the front end, which would separate cups from things like paper and cardboard. And then on the three-dimensional line, the different types of cups would be separated optically or sometimes manually. So it depends on the type of facility, but typically it would be an optical sorter that may be looking for paper with a poly-coated laminated layer, or would be looking for a particular type of plastic resin, or it would be manually, which would mean a person would be looking for it.
Yeah,
Anything
and you know, FPI was one of the funders of a study that was done a number of years ago. There were 5 of us that helped to fund a MRF flow study to really better understand where the materials went. And one of the biggest learnings from that was that 2D versus 3D was critical. So something like a plastic cup is most likely going to hold its shape and end up going to the 3D line, to the container line, whereas a paper cup may get squished and end up being more flat and run with the paper line. But something like a paper cup, you know, one of the things that we're looking at is it might run to the paper line and then ultimately end up in a mixed paper bale, or it could end up on the container line and go into something like a container bale, like a carton bale. We've seen that in a couple of locations where the end markets approve having paper cups in that, along with other poly-coated materials.
Thank you, Lynn. The next question is about what work is being done or has been done on developing end markets for PET thermoforms.
That's a big one for us right now, particularly out on the West Coast. You know, it's interesting to see some of the new companies that are coming into the marketplace to really address that. And, you know, I will fully admit what we're seeing right now is that some of those PET thermoforms end up going into PET bottle bales, but they might also be going into mixed plastics. Risa, do you have anything else to add since you're our plastics expert?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of work done by FPI, by NAPCOR, and by others in the field to try to increase the use of PET thermoforms. The website map shows the PET reclaimers that accept mixed thermoform and bottle bales, and so those are active markets for PET thermoforms when mixed with bottles. And then the other thing I'll say that's emerging is the development of PET depolymerization facilities, like the one that's being planned for Spartanburg, South Carolina, which is intended to rely on a lower value PET stream. And so that facility and facilities like it, that one's being developed by Loop and Indorama. Those types of facilities will really be going after PET thermoforms and other types of PET packaging that are viewed by bottle reclaimers as lower value.
You know, and I think the other thing too is that, you know, PET is growing in use in food service packaging. So I think we'll start to see, we already do see, but we'll see increasing amount of post-consumer recycled content in those PET materials as well. So, and I think, you know, Risa, you were talking about the new technologies that are coming into play. That's really critical, and even in things like foam polystyrene, you know, there are a number of companies right now that are helping to close that loop where they're actually able to take foam polystyrene, food service packaging, and other materials, and then actually convert them back down, in this case, down to that styrene monomer that can then be put right back into the food service packaging product. So there are lots of great opportunities coming into the recycling marketplace that'll help to provide additional options for end markets.
Great. So the next question is, do you have results from studies about compostable packaging really being biodegradable on your website?
So not specifically, but I would also say that I think one of the things that you want to take a look at is, number one, today's compostable food service packaging is being designed to ASTM standards. And so I think one of the things that we see is that they may be designed to those specific standards, but today's composters may not be operating in the same way that those lab tests have been run. So I think one of the things that's very critical, and we point out anytime we talk about compostable food service packaging and getting that composted, is working with your local composter to really understand their facilities and what's going to work and what's not going to work in those facilities. And I think the other thing, and the industry is really talking about this intently at this point, is really identification and labeling of those compostable packaging items is critical, because I think oftentimes what we see is it's non-compostable food service packaging that's getting into the composter's facility, and that's what's causing the problems, not the true compostable packaging products. So it is something that the industry is working on, and certainly something that we're collaborating with the composting community as well.
Great. The next question is, how many of the end markets are okay with cups in the mixed paper bales?
So right now we have, I mentioned there were 21 confirmed end markets for paper cups and polycoated materials. 18 of those are mixed paper. So I think one of the things to keep in mind, and I pointed this out earlier, is that everyone just assumes, because so many of us get our coffee on the go in the morning, that there's an awful lot of paper cups to be recycled. That's simply not true. You know, one of the resources that's available to you for free on our website is we've actually done some estimates for if you were to add food service packaging to those commonly accepted bales like mixed paper, what happens? And one of the things that we found is that if you add paper cups and takeout containers to a mixed paper bale at, let's say, a 10% recovery rate, and frankly, we're a lot less than that, you're talking that paper food service packaging would be only 3% of that entire mixed paper bale. And so it's a very, 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 very small part of that mixed paper bale. And so one of the things that we're finding is those mills who are accepting the products, they're just not getting that much of it. So it has not been a problem for them to process it, and we anticipate, again, that we will have more mills coming online, or more mills saying that, yes, they will accept paper cups in their mixed paper bales and other bales as well.
Great. Do you have contracts with Republic Services across the U.S. or just in certain geographical locations?
Yeah, we don't have the contract specifically with them. It would be that community, obviously, and then it would be specific locations. As I mentioned, the work that we've been doing has been very specific to those geographic locations where we have end markets nearby, and so that's what would dictate it. We would love for a large organization like Republic to go across the board and say we accept these products, but unfortunately we're not there yet.
Great. What is FPI? Is FPI looking at work to support front of house collection at food service outlets?
Yeah, as I mentioned to you earlier, we do have a section on that recyclefsp.org website that provides some details there. I think one of the things that we have been talking about, particularly as we see more location, like cities and states mandate in-store recovery of these products, they're going to need additional help. So I think we as FPI try to figure out what is our role versus the brand's role. So we can go to a brand and say, listen, and we have a number of brands that do participate in the work that we're doing, they can go to the franchisees in certain locations like Chattanooga, Washington, D.C., Louisville, any of the locations where they're already accepting it residentially, to talk to them to find out, are there opportunities to recycle these products commercially as well. So I think we're looking to expand that part of the work that we're doing, but really also recognize, the FPI staff is not going to be able to go into every single, fast food restaurant and coffee shop to tell them how to do this. So, next question.
Next question is, are most of the paper mills okay with clean paper bakery boxes?
You know, I would think so, because most likely it's going to be the exact same composition. The clean paper bakery boxes are most likely going to flatten. So from a 2D, 3D standpoint, from a MRF standpoint, it would most likely go down that fiber line and then most likely into a mixed paper bale. So I would think so.
Okay, great. And then the last question I have for now, unless something comes in, is have you seen an uptick in interest in FPI since China pulled back from purchasing recyclables in the US?
You know, I think your question is an interesting one, because is interest good or bad? You know, I think, you know, we have said we could not have picked a worse time in the history of recycling to try to add new materials, particularly with, you know, export options really shutting down. But I think that's only solidified us to recognize how important those end markets are, and particularly domestic end markets. And so that's why we've been so focused on those markets, you know, in and around North America, because, you know, we do feel a sense of responsibility that we're going to take care of that here and not necessarily ship it off. However, we also recognize, depending on where you are in the country, that may be, you know, your option. And so in some cases, we have to do the due diligence and figure out, are those options okay? Can we add food service packaging to some of those export bales?
Great. Someone asked about the free resources, general pictures for food packaging, flyers for education, and we posted a link, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to mention again where someone can find those.
So if you go to recyclefsp.org, we have in the community section, there is a resident education toolkit, and in that resident education toolkit is where you'll find the flyers and the images, best practices, the survey results, all those sort of things.
Great. And here's a question that's near and dear to my heart, being married to someone who runs a food truck. How involved is FPI with food truck packaging? Is there any available information on how to implement composting at special events like festivals and carnivals?
So because FPI is the trade association and not the actual manufacturer, we are not directly involved with the food trucks, but certainly our members are. You know, obviously that's going to, a food truck is going to be a completely different animal than an in-store program. But I think you also need to recognize that if you're ordering from a food truck, most likely you're going to be taking that away. So trying to figure out, you know, is it available in that community? Because it's probably going to be, you know, ultimately disposed of in the home, or it could be in a commercial, you know, like an office building or something like that. So that's a harder one, but, and I would point that individual to that in-store collection guide, and maybe tailor it specifically to food trucks.
Great. And then I have a question here about PFAS chemicals and the issues that paper mills that are having now with paper mills having some challenges around accepting certain food service items. The question is, do you know if pizza boxes use PFAS for grease proofing?
You know, so I have not heard of any of the paper mills at least coming to us and asking questions specifically about that. But having said that, you know, PFAS is used in a very small amount of food service packaging that's out in the marketplace. And given the pressures that we're seeing specifically on PFAS, you know, I think we see more and more packaging converters moving away from PFAS. So chances are you're probably not going to find those.
Okay. Well, we've run through the questions we had, and really appreciate all of you for joining us today. And thank you so much, Lynn, for providing such helpful and useful information. We hope we hear from some of you through the website or follow-ups. Lynn, is there anything you want to offer as we close?
You know, I guess I would just say that many of you don't know me, but for those of you who don't, tomorrow is my last day at FPI. I've been here for 21 years. For the last, roughly 10, I have been very, very focused on getting more food service packaging recycled and composted. And last week, one of my board members said, "What's one of your proudest moments?" And I said, you know what? When we launched recycling in in Chattanooga, because it was the fruition of a lot of years of very passionate work. And I was just super excited for the industry to recognize we need to be doing something and we need to work collaboratively. So I look to all of you to help, pull on that legacy of getting more food service packaging recycled and composted. And one more comment to add, we would never have been able to accomplish all that we have accomplished to date without our friends at Resource Recycling Systems. So Risa, and to everybody on the RRS team, thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. What a beautiful way to end our day. Thanks to all of you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, Risa.